Tonight, a riveting conversation with two journalists at the epicenter of world events. She's the must-read Washington correspondent for The New Yorker and a CNN analyst. He's the chief White House correspondent for The New York Times and appears regularly on MSNBC. We talk with them as the election of our lifetime is only 2 weeks away. We'll find out what's really happening in Washington, at the White House, the Supreme Court, in Congress, and we'll go inside their new bestseller, The Man Who Ran Washington, The Life and Times of James A. Baker III. It's an intimate look at a brilliant GOP strategist and diplomat from a time that seems more distant from today than it really is. We'll explore how the Republican Party went from Lincoln to Reagan to Trump. We'll find out now at an event as new as this evening's headlines. Welcome Susan Glasser of The New Yorker and Peter Baker of The New York Times. Live from the School of Communication and Media at Montclair State University, here's the director, Dr. Keith Strudler.
With us for that, with some technical difficulties. I am very pleased to introduce to the stage, if you will, this evening from Montclair State University, the School of Communication and Media, two of our finest, most important journalists and analysts who are at the forefront of what's happening in the world of American politics and are going to be speaking with us today about not only the upcoming election and the White House, but their incredible new book on James Baker called The Man Who Ran Washington, which is great for a lot of reasons, none the least of which because it is set in my hometown of Houston, Texas. So introduce to the stage, Susan Glasser and Peter Baker.
Hi, guys.
Hey, guys.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And of course, Susan, your father is a very important member of our community, a member of our school's board. And we're so happy that he was able to convince the two of you to join us for this really important, wonderful evening. I know there's nothing else going on in your lives right now. It's kind of a dead period. But I appreciate you taking the time out to be with us today. So the video suggested some of the headlines that were happening. So I thought we might start there since you are both very involved in what gets put to print. So let's talk a little about the headlines. Today, took a cursory glance. The president criticized Anthony Fauci. I believe he calls him a disaster. Also criticized his throw at the Nationals game several weeks ago. So it does seem a bit dated at this point. So he criticized that. I believe we're staring at a complete inability to get any kind of stimulus package. Nancy Pelosi says, I guess it's dead on the table unless something happened in the last 20 minutes. Trump said, I want even bigger. Who knows what's going to happen? We have the Michigan, there was a rally in Michigan where the president decided that he was going to encourage them to lock not just the governor up, who was nearly kidnapped anyway, but really any of his political rivals up. I think I'm probably missing a few important notes. So Peter Baker, Susan Glasser, you have a front row seat into the White House and into American politics. And with all efforts to appear neutral, is the American White House right now as dysfunctional as it appears? That's a loaded question. I apologize.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. You're a native of Houston, but I'm a native of Montclair. So I'm delighted, of course, to be with everybody tonight. And as has Peter, an honorary Montclarian, if you will. Define dysfunction. I mean, every day you've just read us a list of headlines, but the truth is that, that could be any day in the last 4 years. It's and that, of course, has challenged both of us as chroniclers of this presidency. We're in a unique moment where, you write stuff down and then you can't even believe it when you read it back. We're in a situation, as we have been, I would say, for 4 years, where every day it's the stories that the scandals that don't make the front page or that are hard to remember even because they occurred a week ago. And so that, I think, is one of the things that we'll probably come to remember about this moment in time is the extreme feeling of chaos at all times. And that almost juxtaposed as a political strategy, as a substitute for governing, if you will. Now, of course, a lot of people treated this as political theater for the last 4 years. The difference is now, of course, we're dealing in a deadly pandemic where we're at 200,000 dead Americans plus and counting, and an economic recession that goes along with that. And so it's hard to treat that as theater anymore to the extent that anyone still was.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that comes as part of this, and I think one of the things that we're all struggling with, as particularly as you see that the one thing we all seem to agree on is a stimulus package would be nice. Like it seems like a win-win-win-win-win for everyone who wants to eat. But even for Trump, who probably wants to stay in office, and all the politicians that would like to win their elections. One of the things that we're struggling with is the idea that government seems to be, and I'll use the cliche term, broken, right? And it just doesn't work anymore. And because of this intense polarization that's happening, and we get this idea, and you talked about this in your book, the kind of broken government we had in the past. Is American government, and not just the White House, but I suppose all of Washington, as broken as it seems? Or is this just kind of a recency effect where we always think the last football game was the worst game ever?
Well, you're obviously
that's for Jets fans, by the way. That was really for Jets fans.
If the Jets are the Washington football team, I mean, at least you guys have a name. Look, yeah, we're going through a period of dysfunction, no question about it. We have at moments in our past as well. It's not the first time we've been in a divisive moment or the first time we've been in a polarized moment. There tends to be cycles and ebbs and flows through history, but this happens to be a particularly dysfunctional one. As Susan alluded to, and as you alluded to, the fact that we haven't had a COVID relief bill in 6 months is rather striking, given that both sides want it. You could argue maybe it wouldn't be a good idea, but that's not what either side is arguing. They're just simply arguing about how much money to give away. And usually giving away money is something politicians do well at. If they can't even do the easy thing, how can they do the hard thing, right? And so you talk about our book, James Baker, who was White House Chief of Staff for Reagan, Secretary of State, all these other positions. He was a deal maker. And it's so impossible to imagine a day or a situation where Jim Baker would have allowed 6 months to go by with such a crisis going on without cutting a deal with the other side. It wouldn't have been the deal that all the Republicans wanted or the deal that all the Democrats wanted, but that was the point. A deal meant that both sides got something and both sides gave something away, and he understood that. What is missing in Washington today is that sort of idea that you could have a deal that you don't get everything in, but it's still worth doing. And I think that's what's changed so much. The incentive structure has changed from encouraging bipartisan deal making to discouraging it.
Yeah, and so I want to get into the book. So and I'm going to read a long quote that you wrote from James Baker. And for those that are unfamiliar, by the way, you should buy the book. Available locally too. So always exactly. Always support your local bookseller. So James Baker was a deal maker, right? Even more than he was, a policy wonk. He kind of came to it as a lawyer. He was part of, his family was Baker Botts, which if you grow up in Houston, they own the town. If you're ever involved in anything, you're involved with that firm. So he gets one of his son's graduations, right? He read this, and this was post Watergate, post Vietnam. So it's a turbulent time in America where, like now, a lot of residents are fairly down on America, even as a concept. So he read this to the graduating class. We in this country have been going through a long, dark night of self-criticism. We have been telling ourselves that America has tried to run the world, that it is corrupt, that many of our institutions have failed us and need to be dismantled under the guise of reform. Confession may be good for the soul, but there comes a time when too much confession makes us weaker rather than stronger. In the broadest sense, what can we learn from James Baker's view of America and its place in the world?
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a very provocative question, actually, because, one of the things Peter and I sort of grappled with in doing this biography is how much, is Baker's extraordinary success a product of the man, or is it a marriage of the man and the moment, right? And certainly, as you alluded to, this was in the immediate post-Watergate, post-Vietnam era in American life. And, in many ways, his story that we seek to tell in the book is not just a personal story, but it is the story of Washington from the end of Watergate to the end of the Cold War, which really was a very distinctive moment in time, a moment where the conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States was really predominated in a way that meant there was an unquestioned assumption in a way of American leadership of the West, but also a set of responsibilities and constraints that went along with that. And arguably what we're seeing right now is sort of like the breakup, the final sort of ending of that moment and the idea of unquestioned American authority in the world, right? So, Baker had a sort of mid-century, view of American leadership, but it wasn't the chest beating kind of leadership that we associate with, sort of more recent hawkish Republicans. He was a believer, as was George Herbert Walker Bush, his best friend from the Houston Country Club. We'll talk about that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
The two of them were believers in America being at the head of the table, but very much the idea that there was a table to be seated at. They were multilateralists. They were alliance focused in a way that was fundamental to their approach of America in the world. And I think that's something really important to remember. They were free traders, globalists, not in any sense of seeking kind of global hegemony, and certainly not in the post 9/11 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan sense. So it was really a different world, their world of American power and leadership, but it suggested perhaps a more restrained and more multilateral approach to the United States is still one worth considering at this moment in time.
So I was actually going to ask this later, but you kind of led into this. So, because I really just want to talk about Kincaid, but it's just for my wife. I know she's watching. So, you talked about George Bush's George Herbert Walker Bush, not W, which, I think a lot of our students certainly are more familiar with. You talked about their approach to kind of international affairs. And, that 4-year presidency, it seemed like a lot happened in a very short period of time, right? So we dealt with kind of the end of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, which happened in incredibly quick time. He gets us into a war in the Middle East, which seems to have gone, fairly well, at least according to public opinion polls that left him at a relatively high note when that ended. And then he crashed and burned into this election because the economy went south. And it does seem as though, certainly if you take this presidency as, any kind of model, which I know most people don't, is there an appetite in American presidential politics or American presidencies to have that kind of oversight of kind of the global world order? Or do you think, from a risk reward perspective, it seems like a hard thing to run for president and be like, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to end communism in China. I'm going to do this. I'm going to roll over South America. I'm going to change the whole world. And meanwhile, people are like, yeah, milk is really expensive right now and we can't go to school. Is there any appetite for kind of America being the kind of leader that George H.W. Bush was?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that is, in fact, part of why Trump won 4 years ago, a rejection of the establishment, a rejection of, globalization, an exhaustion with the fact that America had to take on such big world responsibilities. Trump has been convinced for years, and he taps into this among at least a certain part of the population, that America has been somehow taken for advantage of by our allies as well as our adversaries. And so I think you're right. I think his election reflected sort of a more inward turning moment, a moment where let's just stop with these Middle East wars, and why are we giving away money to other people and having troops in other countries and having these free trade policies that send our jobs overseas. And he tapped into that resentment. But I think there's still a lot of Americans too who do understand or believe that America has to play a significant role in the world. And I think that they may have watched this last 4 years with some degree of concern about retreating from that role, because the world becomes more dangerous, arguably, if America is not in the lead.
So let's get back to Texas. All right. So my wife, as I said, went to Kincaid. My mom lives at the Houstonian, which is the manor house, is which actually I had my senior prom dinner at, which was apparently which I did not know was the model for the Baker home. It's beautiful. Yeah. And next time I go back to Houston, which at this point might be 10 years, I am absolutely going to do, I'm using your book now as a driving tour of my hometown to kind of see all the Baker landmarks.
But we took a driving tour of the town with Baker, actually.
Yeah, he was remarkable. We were, working on this book when Baker was well into his 80s. He's just turned 90 this year. And we asked him for a tour of his Houston. And it turned out to be one of the more revealing things, not just because of the sites he showed us, but, everyone asks us, what's the secret to Jim Baker's success? And he will tell you fanatic preparation. He has this family motto, the 5 Ps. Prior preparation prevents poor performance,
Sure.
which, I'm sure his kids roll their eyes at. They've heard it so often. But we get in the car, the black Suburban with him to drive around, and we realize not only does he have a legal pad filled with every single place he wants to take us, that meant something to him in his life, but he's actually already driven the route before we got there and decided he's going to shift some things around. And, that's just not, this is a guy well into his 80s. I really told you a lot about the man.
Yeah. And, there was an emergence, obviously, of very important, powerful Texas politicians, LBJ being kind of at the forefront of that. But Texas started to get really important, and James Baker seemed to be a big part of that. How important is Texas now in Texas, look, having grown up, I was born in Brooklyn, immediately went down south. So kind of understand New York, certainly, but, grew up in Texas, very different places. How important now is Texas in kind of the national political kind of power structure? And how have people like James Baker, the Bush family, how have they changed kind of the entire kind of nature and ethos of American politics?
Well, that's a great question, because I think Baker comes into politics, comes to the fore at a time when Texas is changing. Texas had long, of course, been Democratic, never, elected Republicans to statewide office for basically 100 years after Reconstruction. And it's really the emergence of Bush and with Baker's help that begins to change from solidly conservative Democrat to solidly conservative Republican. And the ideology stays the same. And I think we're now at a similarly interesting moment in Texas's evolution, right? Are we about to see Texas go from being a solid red state election after election, a bedrock of the Republican coalition, to a state that's more competitive? And it looks more competitive right now. Now, does that mean Biden is going to win there? Maybe not, but it might be. And it's possible if he wins a large number across the country, that could pull up Texas, which would be a seismic shift in politics in America, particularly for the Republican Party, which depends on those votes, so those electoral college votes. And even if he doesn't win right now, below him right now, there's a lot of Democrats who are running for the House of Representatives who think they have a better chance because Biden is at least doing better in Texas than they normally have done. So Texas is right now one of those, Dan Balls, our colleague from the Washington Post, calls it the most interesting state in America right now politically.
Yeah, and do you think this is in some ways a forebearer of some of the New South as well, whether it's Georgia, South Carolina, it's hard to kind of say that out loud, but some of these other, is America changing? Is the South going to be where kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe it has for a while because you've got Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. Is that really where the power center is, and Washington is kind of a placeholder?
Well, it's an interesting question. We are probably on the cusp of at least a significant political realignment. How long it will last, we don't know. But there's a reason after Mitt Romney's 2012 defeat by Barack Obama that the Republican Party commissioned an autopsy to understand what went wrong. That autopsy was authored by Reince Priebus, who later became Donald Trump's first White House chief of staff, interestingly, even though he had been very opposed to Trump. But Priebus wrote in this autopsy report that basically, unless the Republican Party figured out how to deal with the reality of demographic change in the United States, it was not going to really have much of a future, because its base of older, white, non-college educated voters was in industrial states was shrinking fast in the South. And so I think, again, Peter's right. We don't know whether 2020 will be the year. And, there have been previous moments when we thought things would flip. Look back to the governor's election in in Georgia 2 years ago. You thought that the Democratic candidate Stacey Abrams was going to win. She did not pull that out. But right now, you do see battleground state polls in places like North Carolina, Georgia, showing a very competitive race. I believe that Biden is ahead at the moment in the averages of the polls in those states. He is not ahead in Texas, but some polls show him tied or closely trailing. And again, this suggests that if the Republican Party remains on the trajectory that it's been, this sort of minoritarian rule of the Trump era, right, where a minority of the population because of the way our electoral college system works, has been essentially governing the country through the Republican Senate and a Republican presidency, that is not a politically sustainable path. And so either the Republican Party is going to get new leadership that reaches out to non-white, non-college educated voters, or you're going to see a realignment. And you're already seeing a record number of Republicans, including Republicans who served in the Trump administration, as well as those who refused to. That's one of the interesting facets of 2020, is that you're seeing a lot of Republicans publicly speak out against the Republican incumbent president and sign letters and do all this. This is extremely uncommon. And I know that we've all gotten used to like the craziness of the Trump era, but this is something that suggests to me that you're going to either have a pretty big faction of Republicans who are no longer Republicans in the next few years.
Well, so this is what a question I'd kind of save for later, but you've kind of led us into it. Ben Sasse is kind of, he's starting to walk it back a little bit, right? From Nebraska. He's like, well, we all know he's kind of crazy. And, I never really liked him anyway. Right. And is it when, I mean, you guys are very tapped into the White House and into Congress. Do you feel like that's coming? Like at what point are some of, whether it's senators, representatives, lobbyists, when, or if are they going to start saying, he's nuts. Like we didn't really, we had to, but is that coming, or are they in for a dime, in for a dollar?
Well, it'll depend entirely on the results. I mean, politics is a very much of a, every man for himself, every woman for himself kind of sport. And come November 3rd or come November 15th or whatever date it is, we finally get the results of this election. If Donald Trump has won, then you'll see Republicans, staying with him, at least for the time being. But if he does lose, if these polls are right, these polls suggest not just that he's going to lose, but he can lose in a significant way, you'll see a lot of Ben Sasses. You'll see a lot of Republicans running for the hills and saying, I never liked this guy. I had nothing to do with him. We need to rethink this. Look, that's what happened after Jimmy Carter with the Democrats. It's what happened after, Barry Goldwater with the Republicans. I mean, winning matters and losing matters. And the reason why Trump has held on to the Republican Party so well the last 4 years is they did perceive him as having won, and they were afraid of balking at him. But if he loses, that's a whole different game.
So let's talk about winning and what it takes to win. James Baker helped the son of his best friend win the presidency. He made sure that the votes were counted the right way in the state of Florida, and by all accounts, by your writing, outmaneuvered the competition, and whatever happened, and we have 8 years of George W. Bush, and which again puts the center of power down in Texas. There is obviously a lot of concern about what may or may not happen with this election and how votes are going to get counted and which votes are going to get counted. And anyone who talks to, a parent or an aunt, they're scared to death because they're like, I'm going to go vote in person. So, people will be talking to 90-year-old grandparents who are going to be standing out in the rain for 4 hours because they are afraid their vote's not going to count one way or another. What is the White House strategy? Well, first of all, how legitimate do you think this concern that seems to be everyone says the worst version of what they're thinking? How legitimate do you think that is? I mean, is democracy that fragile in the United States? But B, what's the White House strategy? Because right now, say what you want, they're looking down on an 11-point, it's and 20, 30 million people have already voted. What are they thinking?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, you've never seen a situation, it should go without saying, but we might as well say it again, because I think it's important to say it. The president of the United States has been, systematically attacking the legitimacy of the institution of voting itself in this country repeatedly as a campaign strategy. And of course, that's something we've never seen before, except we have seen it from Donald Trump before. He's called every election since he entered public life rigged in advance, perhaps preemptively, simply seeking to explain away a loss.
We call it sandbagging in sports, sandbagging.
Exactly. He's trying to, manage expectations maybe, but at the expense of our electoral system. What's new and even more astonishing this year is that as the incumbent president of the United States, he has repeatedly been directly asked and refused to answer the question of whether he would accept a peaceful transfer of power and whether he would accept a defeat if it was certified as one. And so that's something that's sort of taken it to a whole new level. The other thing that he's done in terms of norm shattering around the elections is he actually suggested publicly at one point, he said maybe we should delay the election and that he would unilaterally do so, which A, he does not have the power to do, but B, again, it's a sort of breathtaking assault on the very concept of voting. But, basically it suggests the political dilemma that the president is in. After 4 years of Donald Trump, basically no one in America in their right mind is undecided on this guy, right? They either are in favor of him, which is a small and, deeply committed minority, or they're not just against him, but, fervently so and highly unlikely to change their minds. So from the beginning, if you looked at 2020, one of Trump's possible courses to reelection was essentially to depress the opposition and to make sure that they didn't turn out or to even actively suppress the vote. And of course, this is also part of a Republican strategy that you've seen in a number of southern states in recent years, which is a systemic efforts being made and lawsuits and the like to bring down the minority vote across the South and to essentially suppress turnout that they believe would not be favorable to them. Donald Trump has taken that farther than ever before this year. And of course, there's then the entire chaos surrounding the Postal Service and his new Postmaster General, which we can talk about. But obviously that's led people to really question, how am I going to get my vote counted? And in the middle of a pandemic, what's safe to do? And so nobody really knows what election day itself is going to be like. And that's why you see this enormous uncertainty surrounding what the outcome of the election is going to be, even though the polls are actually very clear cut at this point.
Do you think Trump in his head thinks he's going to lose at this point? I mean, Peter, I believe you've taken long flights with the president at this point. I mean, you probably understand the psychology as well as anyone. Do you think in his head he's thinking this is not going to go well and I'm going to figure out a way out of it?
Well, we actually printed a story today on the front page in which we said that even though Trump is outwardly confident, everybody around him is seeing the writing on the walls and beginning to, get pretty concerned, and the backbiting and the finger pointing has begun. And then he took instant issue with that. He had a call this morning with his campaign team on which we managed to get on, other reporters managed to get on, even though it was supposedly a private call. And about half the call was railing about the story, how untrue it was, how he's more than happy with his chief of staff. He's very confident. And then he tweets out, "We're doing great. I'm more confident than I've ever been either campaign. We're having boffo rallies." Anybody who remembers the word boffo, raise your hand. And it's just, look, he has to say that publicly. Obviously, you can't go into an election saying, "Yeah, I think I'm going to lose." But he actually has kind of hinted at that in some of these rallies when he wasn't trying to dispute a story of ours. He actually kind of said, "Yeah, I could lose this thing, and that would be terrible. And if you don't come to vote for me, I'm never coming back to your state. And if I lose, I might have to leave the country." So he himself has been publicly airing the possibility that he might lose, which is something incumbents generally don't do, at least admit out loud. So yes, I think he understands he's down the polls. He can cite all of his non-existent private polls showing that supposedly he's winning all he likes, but nobody thinks that even the pro-Trump polls or the more favorable to Trump polls don't show him winning at this point.
By the way, people can start throwing some questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to some as we get towards the end. There's a couple points that you raised in that answer. And one is, in both of your answers, about the racial dynamic, certainly of this election. I actually want to go back to the Bush presidency, HW with Baker and the Willie Horton ad, which for those of you that are unfamiliar, I mean, one of the, I would say, besides the Daisy ad, maybe the most infamous political ad, certainly in national political history, maybe until today. I guess now, everything, all gloves are off. But and that ad certainly had awful racial stereotypes, kind of played on this white suburban fear, made it seem as if Dukakis was soft on crime, was going to allow these awful folks of color to come out and commit crimes in your white suburban neighborhood. Very eerily reminiscent of Trump's claim on the stoop the other day. Hey, suburban women, I saved your neighborhoods, right? This really this frightening kind of trope of racism that it's not even a dog whistle. It's just right on out loud. I mean, when you were talking with Baker, did he ever regret? Was there ever any regret of, what we did there kind of started something rolling downhill that was tough to stop?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because actually that is one of the only things. This is not a man who's given to a lot of looking backwards in the rearview mirror and questioning his moves. That's just, not the way that Jim Baker rolls. That 1988 camp, but he did say that this was one example where they might have gone too far. And I think there are a lot of people who would agree with the premise of your question that, you can draw a direct line, a through line, if you will, from the attacks of 1988 and the racially charged advertising to what we're looking at today in a sort of no holds barred, as you said, not dog whistles, but, just whistles. It's so overt. That being said, it also tells you how far we've come. Can you imagine George Herbert Walker Bush being asked if he to disavow white supremacy and refusing to do so? I mean, come on. This is not. It's important to remember how far down we've spiraled as well. Interestingly, that 1988 campaign, I think it does reflect our subject in many ways. He was seen and really was a ruthless political operator. This was no holds barred. Winning was the absolute object. And when he came in to run the Bush campaign in the summer of 1988, Michael Dukakis was winning by 17 points. And Baker, although he was George Herbert Walker Bush's best friend and closest, partner on the public stage, absolutely unsentimental and rigorous in the way that he was famous for analyzing problems. So this was a problem that required basically everything that they could throw at Michael Dukakis, including the kitchen sink. And they understood from the beginning that after 8 years of Reagan and the fatigue of those years, that reelecting another Republican president was going to be hard sailing. And, they basically had the toughest, most ruthless political consultants in the business, including the late Lee Atwater. And they turned Michael Dukakis, a mild-mannered technocrat from Massachusetts, into practically an enemy of the state, a flag-burning, Pledge of Allegiance denying, ACLU card-carrying member who also had this furlough program in which a murderer named Willie Horton was released and did terrible things to a couple. Now, as for the ad itself, you mentioned, I should just give the footnote because people might have forgotten this, that the real inflammatory ad was actually run by a nominally independent outside group, the one that people remember. But it's completely true that the Bush campaign used Willie Horton. In fact, Lee Atwater was quoted that summer as saying something like, I'm going to make, Willie Horton into Michael Dukakis's running mate. And it actually was started by Al Gore, the Democrat from Tennessee, who ran unsuccessfully against Michael Dukakis in the primaries. And he was the first one to make use of this opposition research. I say that not in any way to excuse Bush, but I think it's very interesting because it shows you, how in a ruthless kind of zero-sum political competition, people at that time would weaponize anything. And if there's an echo in the very uncomfortable politics of today, I think, you're right to hear one. The difference is what happened after the elections. And that's where Jim Baker and the Washington of that day was very different. The first thing that he did after winning this brutal campaign against Dukakis, he becomes Secretary of State, and he sits down with the Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives, Jim Wright, and cuts a deal to end probably the single most divisive foreign policy issue of the 1980s, which was American funding for the Contra wars in Latin America, and takes that off the table. And, all those deals that Baker is famous for, reforming Social Security, the tax reform of 1986, those were deals made with Democrats. So that's a big difference.
I found two of the more touching moments in the book were when you describe Tip O'Neill praying, for President Reagan, and Jimmy Carter kind of being welcomed back in for really kind of basically ensuring the Sandinistas step down from power and really doing the Republican political establishment a huge favor, and well, it didn't work, but could have helped them win another term. So that togetherness, like it feels like 1,000 years ago at this point.
Right.
So as two prominent members of the press, one of the things that Jim Baker seemed to do very well was he used the press, right? He knew how to, by being honest, but in the way that benefited him the most, he was able to establish strong working relationships with powerful, important journalists like would have been yourselves at that time, and get his information dumped when he wanted it and get his story right. One of the things I think certainly for us that we run a media school, that is troubling, and I think for a lot of people, that the demonization of the American press, not only the discrediting of their stories, but in some ways almost the threats of violence and really kind of, like you mentioned, almost turning that into an enemy of the state. And you can make certainly there are some cases in which, parts of the press have, I don't want to say earned that distinction, but certainly haven't helped themselves and so forth. Do you think, is there a way? Well, first of all, how dangerous do you think this is, what's happened currently? And I won't pin it all on Trump, although he certainly takes a lion's share of the blame. How dangerous do you think this is to us as a public? And B, do you think we can put the genie back in the bottle? Let's say we move on after this at some point. Can we get a restoration of trust in kind of information? Or is that something that with Facebook and, X number of years of Roger Ailes, are we done? We teach a media school. We're trying to teach literacy and train people to become the next Susan Glasser and Peter Baker, hopefully. But it's hard to kind of keep the faith sometimes.
Yeah, look, there's a lot to unpack in there. A couple of things I would say. One is the fragmentation of the media, which of course precedes Donald Trump, has meant that people go to favorite parts of the media environment for the information that suits them, that satisfies their preconceptions, their beliefs, their ideological convictions. And that's different than the Reagan, Baker, Bush era, right? During that era, you had these three networks. CNN was just starting up. You had a handful of major newspapers. And so you had a fact base that everybody was working from. And then they had their debates about what they meant. Today, of course, it's so different. And you're right that what Trump does is so much different than what other presidents have done. I've covered 4 presidents now. All of them hated their press coverage. None of them was all that happy about the White House press corps. They all criticized us. They all attacked us at times, but none of them did it the way Trump does. What Trump does is so much more, I think dangerous is the right word in terms of the press. When you say enemy of the state, you're using a Stalinist term that was used to justify sending millions to the gulag and many to their death. If you say words like fake news, you're discrediting not just a particular story you might think is inaccurate or not fully there, but the very idea of the news. He's tearing away at the credibility of the media as a whole. And that's, I think, a dangerous thing because we do get things wrong. We do have instances where we make mistakes. In our business, we try to correct them. In our newspaper, I know, in the New Yorker, we have, a huge commitment to getting things right. And when we do get them wrong, we have a commitment to correcting them. But that's different than saying that everything is fake and nothing can be believed in. And that's, I think, a dangerous trend.
Yeah. So I'm going to start pulling some from the questions from our viewers as well. So, and we'll mix these in. There's a lot of people with PTSD, obviously, who are, so they are concerned. Certainly we have people that say, hey, look, Hillary was up a lot. And we woke up the day after the election and we said, hey, what happened? And with, it seemed almost inconceivable, right? The Access Hollywood to the Billy Bush tape breaks. It's about as bad as you can get. I understand there's the James Comey kind of situation, but what to those that are like, look, this is going to happen again, Trump's going to win. Is that just kind of a reaction, or is there a real chance that this thing goes either way?
Well, look, there is definitely a real chance, as there was, by the way, last time, even in those election scenarios that had, Clinton 85% projected to win. Remember, that means that 15% chance of President Trump winning. It was a low percentage chance and he ran the table and he won. A couple points. I mean, a lot of people, whoever asked that question, you're certainly not alone. In fact, David Axelrod, who was the Obama political strategist, he actually, I noticed that he tweeted today exactly on this, saying like, look, I know everybody has PTSD, but 2016 is not being rerun in 2020. And his reasons why are, first of all, the national polling average right now for Biden is significantly ahead of where it was for Clinton. She was leading, but right now Biden is ahead by around 10 points in the national polling average. Whereas
I knew that dog was going to get into. I'm so excited.
That's Ellie the dog, and she's the very best dog.
She loves Montclair.
Well, she can't be because Hudson's the best dog, and he's somewhere upstairs. So.
Ellie and Hudson. All right.
Well,
two
she
Montclair dogs.
Does love Montclair. So Axelrod's point was, number one, the polling average actually is wider right now than it was at this comparable point for Hillary. In some way, that's significant. Number two, Biden's favorable ratings are significantly higher, about 10 points higher than Hillary Clinton's. And number three, the best guidepost historically to what the final outcome of a national presidential election is going to be is actually what the incumbent president's approval rating is. That those two things, those numbers by election day tend to converge. Donald Trump is not running as an outsider as he was 4 years ago, but as the incumbent president this time. And, he has an approval rating that's stuck in the low 40s and has been for a very long time. So it's hard to imagine people suddenly changing their minds about an incumbent president, never mind one who's as divisive as Donald Trump. Now, I think the real reason for uncertainty this time maybe is not the allegations about Hunter Biden being some kind of replay of, James Comey and Hillary's emails, but the uncertainty around who's going to be able to vote and what does our election look like, given what we already talked about in terms of voter suppression, in terms of the Postal Service and the pandemic. So that remains a significant question mark for me going into this. And yes, like the rest of you, Peter and I are going to spend the next 2 weeks, having the same conversation over and over again 16 million times. And we're really actually not going to know the answer until we know the answer.
I would add, if you're a Trump fan, there's still reason to hope. If you're a Biden fan, then there's still reason to worry because anything can happen. But I think Susan's right that the X factor, the thing that's different, the thing that's hard to measure by historical standards is exactly doing this in the middle of a pandemic. Right. And if you have people voting in unconventional ways and suddenly have the rules changing and flux in all these different states about whose ballot gets counted, you count it, whether it has a postmark on this date or that date, those are so hard to judge at this point. And if we have a result that looks something like this direction on election night, and then it changes over the days and weeks to come as the counting continues, that could throw uncertainty and suspicion into something that might not be justified, but would be troubling, I think, for the credibility of our democracy. One thing that's really important to an election is that people believe the election results is fair and free and reflects an honest assessment of what happened. And if the results seem to be changing over the days and weeks that follow the election day itself, you can see how President Trump might exploit that and sow doubt if he's not winning in the ultimate result. And so there's all kinds of uncertainties at this point.
Yeah, someone who lost student council president in 8th grade. I still do have my concerns about the count of that election. So we all carry that burden.
It was rigged.
We know that. I mean, you look, I grew up in Houston. You understand how dirty Texas politics is. I was an outsider. I was a carpetbagger, came in from the Northeast. We all know what happened. So there are very few real events that are left that could change the nature of this. Now, one is obviously the debate, and who knows what kind of crazy land will go there. But the other is, and I don't know that it's going to change anything, but we've got a Supreme Court justice that's very likely to be coming in maybe now, right? So from your perspective, is this a political calculation that this is going to be able to drum up votes? Or, and maybe it's, the senators are like, look, I can win in Kentucky off this. Or is this just a recognition that politics goes like this and we had our time, we're going to get in as much as we can. And then, you know what? It's their turn. Which are we looking at here?
Well, you might be looking at a combination of all of the above, different senators with different motivations, but there's no question that Republicans and especially Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell have made the courts and the Supreme Court in particular a focus of their efforts, and it is part of the essentially opportunistic mutual pact between Donald Trump and Senate Republicans, many of whom do harbor deep personal distaste for him. And Donald Trump knows that. I mean, he knows that, Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse, speak for many of their colleagues when they say these things. And he's not like under any illusion about that. But he's gone out of his way, as he sees it, and as many of them see it, to basically allow them to fulfill much of their agenda. And the opportunity of controlling the Supreme Court potentially for a generation is so overwhelming that you've seen them all immediately jettison the precedent that they themselves only set a few years ago with Merrick Garland. 8 months before an election, they said that was too soon to an election to confirm a Supreme Court justice. Now we're literally talking under 2 weeks to an election when the Senate is going to be holding votes on this. This is an extraordinary thing. And so I do think the will to power overwhelms a senator's dubious fears of being a hypocrite, because they've all seen that they can survive a large amount of hypocrisy on Capitol Hill. That is one thing that is bipartisan, and especially it's been abundantly in evidence the last few years. But just a final thought, though, on the Supreme Court. For many years, it's been a sort of received conventional wisdom that Republicans cared more about the courts and cared more and would achieve more electoral advantage around a Supreme Court nomination. This may finally no longer be the case. And I do think that, the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was on the one hand expected, but on the other hand, I think a real shock, especially the idea that she had made it so long into Trump's term and that they were still going to proceed anyways. I do think that, there are many people, including some Republicans, who find it all to be a bit much and may actually be motivated not in the way that people expected, but motivated to vote more for Joe Biden as a result of this. So we'll see.
Yeah. So we have time for a few more questions. An interesting question one of our students asked, and I'll add to it, is the White House ready for a female president, for a woman president? And I'd actually like to add a second part to this. If Biden does win, he will be more in the twilight of his working career, we shall say. And he would have a young, energetic, ambitious vice president. Now, as you kind of, chronicled in the book, two of the certainly, let's leave the Cheney years out, but when you're talking about Quayle or Bush, the vice presidencies were not given particularly Quayle, not given a whole lot to do, shall we say. Do you think as they suggest, where is America in kind of not being ready, but wanting to elect a female president, which we failed to do in the last election? And I guess B, how do you think Harris's role might be if she's second in line in this upcoming presidency? Because I think a lot of us assume this is a 4-year, waiting period, and it's go time 4 years from now.
Yeah, I think her selection was probably one of the most significant vice presidential selections we've seen in our time, because I think that you're right, the odds of her becoming president, either because of something happening in the next 4 years or because she's the next person on deck for the Democratic nomination in 2024, are not inconsiderable. That's certainly a very possible situation. Vice President Biden, if he becomes president, will be 78 at the time of his inauguration. He'll be 82 at the end of his presidency. He's clearly, you would think, he's not running for a second term at that point. And he himself has referred to himself as a transition figure. And the transition, you would think, would be at least one person that might be the next person in line would be Kamala Harris. Now, does that give her an automatic in the next round, 2024? No, but she has a heads up. And I think that we'll see how she performs. She didn't do all that great in the Democratic primaries. Obviously, she did not win any primaries. She didn't, fulfill the expectations a lot of people had for her. She seems to have done better, according to most Democrats, at least, in the fall general election. She's impressed people during her debate with Mike Pence, and she seems to have fulfilled the role people wanted her to fulfill for now. So yeah, she's got a real tryout on the stage, and people will be paying a lot more attention to her if she wins, if she and the Biden ticket win over these next 4 years. They'll pay attention to her even if she loses, because she'll obviously still be out there as a force for 2024.
Yeah. So one of our viewers wants to know, Baker has said, look, he's still apparently still going to vote for Trump, right? I need the judges, the tax cuts, deregulation, all that good stuff. Have you spoken to James Baker since the debate, since I suppose we do believe that was real COVID, right? I mean, I know there's all the conspiracy theories that he may or may, he and apparently he and Nick Saban may have had the same COVID. Do you believe there's any chance that James Baker changes his mind, or might he go in there and not be able to do it?
Well, these are good questions. And, one of the interesting things for Peter and I working on this book was that, it coincided with the rise and presidency of Donald Trump. And so it was fascinating for us as we considered sort of this different moment in time in Washington to also be seeing Baker's comments about the dysfunction and the new politics that he was visibly uncomfortable with at the same time in today's Washington. And, he really, he did view Trump's arrival as a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. He told us that he thought Donald Trump was crazy, that he was nuts. Those are words that he used. He was concerned about his departure from what Baker sees as Republican Party core principles, things like internationalism, free trade, being skeptical of the Russians. He also was offended, of course, by the sheer sort of incompetence and dysfunction of Trump's administration. Baker was considered by Democrats and Republicans the gold standard of White House chiefs of staff. I remember going to visit with him just a few weeks after Trump was inaugurated in 2017. And, he said to me, and why does he keep saying that Mexico is going to pay for the wall? Mexico is not going to pay for the wall. By the way, Donald Trump was out there on the campaign trail just the other day saying Mexico is going to pay for the wall.
They just haven't paid yet. They haven't paid yet.
Right. Exactly.
That's exactly right. These are college students. They know how this works. You can't. There's loans.
You want more of the wall to actually be built than it
true.
was.
That's true. Yeah.
Look, Baker would seem to be the un-Trump, and he would also seem to be a natural anti-Trump. The Bush family, with whom he's so closely identified, chose not to vote for Donald Trump in 2016. And yet, fascinatingly, Baker was unable to fully renounce Trump, and he very reluctantly voted for him in 2016, he told us. This time around, he at one point volunteered to us that he was considering voting for Biden, but then he later said, just a couple of months later, don't say that. Don't say that I'm voting for him. I'm still a Republican, even if my party has left me. And I guess that, a lot of people, as you might imagine, when we published the book, have been asking us, basically every day there's some new Trump story. And people say, well, have you asked Baker if he's, changed his mind yet? And we have appeared with him a couple times since the book came out, and he's given no indication of changing his mind. A lot of people who worked very closely with Baker in his public life have reached out to us and said they were very dismayed by this or surprised. But I guess where Peter and I came down is, if the subject of your biography tells you over and over again the same answer to the same question, then you need to listen to him. And he's telling you who he is. And he's chosen at the age of 90, to be identified as a partisan Republican to his core. I mean, that obviously is what means something to him.
Yeah. So I know we're running out of time, and I thank you so much for giving us all of this time and being so generous. And I will refrain. We'll do another time. The favorite place you ate in Houston, and have you become a Rockets fan? That's very important to my soon-to-be bar mitzvah son, because by the way, when you don't throw a bar mitzvah party, because we cannot, obviously, you have to make different arrangements, which now, when this thing passes, and I believe it will at some point, I have promised him a Houston Rockets trip of the West Coast. So we will be catching every game from the lake. Oh, it's great, right? And it's a win-win. I get to go too. This is a win-win, right? I don't have to lift up the chair. It's great. So we'll save that for the wedding. But every presidency, or every president, changes the presidency in some form. Some have suggested this has really stretch the boundaries of the White House. Do you think the presidency is forever altered because of some of the eccentric kind of ways in which Trump has led? Or do you think, look, you elect Biden and, things are going to kind of go back the way they were before, and then there'll be a Republican, what do you see happening with the presidency?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've actually been having that conversation also for 4 years, I think. The presidency isn't a rubber band. It's not going to snap back to exactly what it was. But I do think there will be, if Trump were to lose, then there will be an incentive for the next person to show that he, in this case, Biden, is not Trump, and that he will want to show that by restoring some things that have changed. But there are things that he might just keep, that other presidents might decide, hey, maybe I don't have to disclose as much as previous presidents were disclosing because Trump got away with it. So I think there is, in fact, a consequence to, each president as they change the office. Now, the biggest thing I think that Trump has done is to sort of, throw out all the norms and boundaries that we had expected that a president was going to abide in the post-Watergate era. We haven't had presidents up until now tell the Justice Department to go prosecute my enemies. We haven't had a president, basically say, I don't believe the intelligence agencies. I prefer to believe the leader of Russia. We have not had, presidents who have, put their political appointees to override the CDC in the middle of a pandemic. These are things that are new and different. Biden will feel I think if he were to win, and there's still a big if, so let's not assume, but if he were to win, I think he will feel that there's a political incentive to undo some of those things and show that he is not Trump. But you're right, the presidency evolves. And I think, one of the things, for instance, is the expansion of presidential power. Obama came to office criticizing George W. Bush for expanding presidential power during the war on terror. And then he expanded presidential power through executive orders on immigration and issues that he cared about. Trump came in and took the things that Obama did and used that to justify expanding presidential power even further. And the courts have allowed him to get away with some of that. So I think that that's the kind of thing that's almost bipartisan, in which each president coming in tries to take advantage of the power that he has been or she has been left. And you may see some of that in the future after Trump.
So I will, and I know there's still a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of them, but I'll try to at least leave with one kind of more summary kind of question. Actually, it's a two-part, which I know is a terrible thing to do. It's like the worst thing a journalist can ever do. But it's just because they only answer this. They only answer what they want, or they answer the second. Of course, it's terrible. So don't listen to me, guys. But do as I say, not as I do. So. First off, how do you guys work together as co-authors, as journalists? You ran a Moscow bureau together. I know this is a little bit off the topic, but as a married couple that lives together and spends all your professional time, what's the secret to your success as two individually prominent journalists who then, I'm sure have strong personalities, strong wills. You've gotten to the, I'm guessing maybe a little. And so what's the secret of, writing and I'm not, writing a seamless book that does seem as if it's a singular voice that is really well written and is an incredible history lesson for those of us that don't know some of the facts that you've been able to teach us. What's the secret of how you've been able to work together and cover stories together? Because I think it's fascinating.
Well, the good news is, as you can see, we're still on speaking terms. So, it's worked out okay. The truth is, this isn't even our first book together. So at least we had some confidence. We did write a book after we were in Moscow together about the rise of Vladimir Putin called Kremlin Rising. And, frankly, that one was actually a bit harder because we actually finished that totally unintentionally on the same day that I gave birth to our son. So, this one, it was 7 years in the making, but in many ways a bit hard, a bit easier. Yeah. We're so lucky to have a partnership and a running conversation. In many ways, I can't imagine. What if one of us was doing a 7-year-long project that didn't include the other? So I guess I would sort of turn it around and say, we started out working together at the Washington Post and have been lucky to have a professional.
She was my editor.
Mm. Well, she obviously, she liked your work.
Yeah.
Apparently went well. Yeah.
Well, we established early on.
So final question. If you are, and hopefully you will, 4 years from now, we come back, we're having the same conversation. What will we be talking about?
Well, I think we'll be talking about Trumpism. I mean, even if Trump isn't around necessarily, I think the question is whether in 4 years the political system has found a way to come back together, at least to have a more civil and more constructive, competition of ideas, or whether or not, whether Trump is leaving in 4 years or whether he has been out of office for 4 years. My guess is he won't be entirely gone, or at least the forces that led him to be president won't be gone. So people will have to be, addressing that.
Yeah. Susan Glasser, The New Yorker, CNN, everywhere. Peter Baker, New York Times, MSNBC. Full disclosure, I'm a loyal Morning Joe watcher, so I see probably more than you'd be comfortable knowing. Thank you so much. You so gracious with your time, your knowledge. Please, all of you, if you have not purchased and read the book, The Man Who Ran Washington, it is a fabulous read, and you're getting your money's worth because it's not a short read. So it's worth the dollars.
Not a long read though.
No, it reads quickly, but it's it's not a pamphlet, right? I'm going to the Curb Your Enthusiasm. It's more of a pamphlet, right, from the Seinfeld year. But thank you so much. We wish we could have you to our university in person. We thank Susan, your dad, so much for all that he does for our school and for helping to make this happen. So hopefully in the future, we'll have students that can make it down to Washington, and hopefully then after that we'd have you up and to see our beautiful facilities. But thank you so much, and good luck as you round and take a vacation after it's over, please.
Thank you guys. So great to be with you. Thank you so much.